you have Azog, who is supposed to be dead, fighting off against Thorin. Meanwhile, Bolg, the actual villain, is fighting Legolas, who's running up Minecraft stairs as they're falling, and then Bolg falls down a frozen waterfall and gets crushed by another piece of falling debris.
He's Legolas, he can do anything.
I kid you not, when I watched that scene in the movie, someone in the seat row in front of me said, "What?"
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us two of our favorite guests, Philip Dutt and Jared Stonefield, to discuss the third installment of The Hobbit, known as The Battle of the Five Armies, it has a screenplay by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, Peter Jackson, and Guillermo del Toro. That's right. He's back again for the third installment. Why wouldn't he be? He was there for the first two anyways, and it was directed by Peter Jackson. So, getting right into the details that you guys all are really here for anyways. That's what you care about. Jared, what is your initial impressions having watched the third installment of this series?
All right, so my initial rating of it would be a 3 out of 9.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you don't have to give the rating yet. I mean, I appreciate it.
I don't have to give the rating yet?
I just wanted your,
Okay.
when you first watched it,
Gotcha.
What was your impression of the film? What was your biggest takeaway kind of thing? Although a 3.9 is a startling review. A little sneak peek for you guys there.
Yeah, so my basic thoughts about this was that it's a movie that forgets it's part of the Hobbit trilogy and fails to be a part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Interesting. Yeah, that's we'll get into that. That is quite a spicy sentence right there. Love that. Philip, what was your initial impressions of this film, having watched it?
I was, in a sense, surprised. Like, my expectations were very low, and they actually exceeded my expectations.
Oh, okay. That's a opposite spectrum kind of hot take right there. I love that. That's what we go for on this podcast. I will say for myself, I watched this in theaters, in 3D, in a back-to-back installment because I couldn't do that for The Lord of the Rings, so I had to do it for something. And I just remembered seeing this film, walking out going, why did they do so many of the things they did in this film? There was some really, really cool things in this film that I will forever remember, and some things that I thought they did very well. So there is one sense in this film that I remember forever thinking, that was amazing. There are other parts of this film that just piss me off to no degree. So this is a very emotional flip-flop of a film for me, so we'll get into that today. But if people are curious and have not watched the film, Jared, you want to give us what the summary of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies is?
Yeah, so we start off basically right with some dragon action. The dragon Smaug burns down Laketown after ravaging and escaping Erebor. Bard the Bowman thankfully kills Smaug, but that opens up a whole new world of trouble because everyone wants the Lonely Mountain and the treasures inside. And nobody wants the treasures inside more than Thorin Oakenshield himself. It starts to get to his head a little bit. People are a little concerned about how much he's loving the gold. And unfortunately, elves, dwarves, men, and eventually orcs and goblins all come together to fight for the Lonely Mountain.
Nice. Yeah, that's a pretty good summary of the film. Now, you gave your review a little early on, the 3.9. Philip, what was your rating for this film?
I think that I would give it a 5.
Okay.
I think a 5 would be justice. And honestly, I can go more into that later.
Yeah, we will.
But,
we will, for sure.
But there's like a context with me watching it before and then watching it now. and then
Sure.
in the context also of like, I mean, of just other Lord of the Ring content, which I think like really, I guess, affects my way of like looking at the movie
Sure.
now than it did before.
Yeah, and I will say that for personal enjoyment of a film, there will be a lot that has to do with your expectations, right? If you expect a lot from a film, you have the bar up here, and their ability to fail you is a lot easier than if the bar is way down here, right? That's why I'm okay with Frozen. Why? Because I thought it was going to be a garbage film, and it actually turned out to be decent. So, take that as you will. Don't judge me too hard. In regards to this, I gave it a 4.15. So, not amazing. Kind of pretty close to Jared on this one. We can shake hands on this guy. So, I would say that it was definitely... I mean, I already said what I think about it. It's got good things, it's got bad things, and we get it all in one film. So, and that being said, I watched the extended edition because I try to give the extended edition justice. Sometimes you miss things if you don't do the extended edition. Sometimes the extended edition is not worth it. Probably the case in this one. Anyways, let's get into that opening scene. So, we have it start off with the precursor, I Am Fire, I Am Death, from the previous film, comes into this with Smaug coming out and destroying Laketown, and the big fight where Bard comes to save the day. Just thinking about that opening scene and how it reintroduces us to the characters and reintroduces us to how we should feel and what the impression of this film is in general. Philip, what was your impression of how they brought us back into the film?
I thought that it was actually done pretty decent. As far as you're looking at how, like, I mean, basically they picked up right where they stopped from the previous movie, and I think that the way they ended the previous movie, I, in my opinion, left you enough on a cliffhanger to want to see like what happens next. And so that gave some more action with Smaug there and Bard shooting the dragon. I think book wise, I wish they would have done it differently, but still, like it was decent. I thought so.
Yeah, and I do appreciate a distinction between, like, I know you're a big fan of all of the original lore and content of Tolkien, and being able to say, okay, I personally wouldn't have done it this way, but I still think they did it well. I think that's a fair distinction. Jared, what was your initial thoughts of this film as they hit it off?
Actually, I thought the beginning was pretty solid. I think opening up with shots of the dragon flying over Laketown in the clouds creates this great sense of suspense and dread. It's exactly what you should get when you're going into this movie. And then, the death and the carnage that Smaug unleashes on Laketown is pretty heartbreaking because you get to know these characters over the course of a film. How Smaug meets his end, I do not care for in any way, shape, or form. I totally understand the reasoning behind not having Bard shoot a single black arrow from his bow and quiver. The reasoning that the director gave behind this was that Smaug is so big, they scaled him up so big for this movie that they had to make the black arrow much larger, much more of a threat. I can go with that. That's fine.
Sure.
But having his son stand there while he shoves parts of his longbow into the sides of a bell tower and then shooting the arrow past his son's face and the son not getting a scratch from this giant metal arrow, I think that is really tempting my suspension of disbelief. And I should have realized that that was the precursor to the rest of this movie.
Thank you. Yes, that was the first sign when I watched this in theaters that this had problems. But yeah, I want to get back to what Philip said, because you are right that other than that, like, huge glaring hole, in my opinion, in that fight, everything else about it is awesome. Like, Smaug is scary, everyone's running away, Bard's in jail. Like, created a lot of good reasons for you to be concerned about what's about to happen here. I don't want to say anything more about what you just said because you said it perfectly, and those are all the things I was thinking. I have a curiosity about this, which I don't know that I thought about the first time I watched this, but in regards to the third film, this scene, right, the battle with Smaug, is probably the coolest scene in the entire film, in my opinion. I think that everything in the previous two films have been building up to this. There's some degree in which the first and second one were extended to some degree to build up this scene even more. And you see that especially in The Desolation of Smaug, where you have a lot of buildup between Bilbo and Smaug in their dialogue about how he is this big threat and how he is going to destroy everything. And he starts with Laketown. And so this scene is like the scene we've seen built up to and expected from the very beginning, where they say, we are going to get this treasure that is protected by this dragon. Now here's the dragon. And I come to a certain degree of curiosity from a storytelling standpoint where we have a lot of fight scenes in this film, okay? We have a lot of scenes where swords are clashing, people are dying. Like, there is no need for an extra scene. And so I'm curious, and I want to kind of open up the floor here, is why they didn't take this battle and put it in the previous film.
Oh, they didn't have time. They didn't have time.
Well, they could make...
Like,
I mean, they made time in all the other films for any number of discussions about any number of things, from, oh, I am your friend, Thorin, why not? Or making up random scenes with Azog fighting them in the forest and stuff like that. Like, could they not just make the time or the scenes for this earlier on?
I have always thought that this should have been the climax to the second movie.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I scratched that. I always thought that there should be two movies to begin with. But, so the problem with this is that I will give the screenwriters a bit of credit, because this is something actually they talked about in the film appendices, because I watched those recently too. I'm really interested to hear what the directors and screenwriters have to say. Tolkien's story actually provides, it's like a little weird, because this is what happens 3/4 of the way through the book. The dragon comes, there's a big scene where where Smaug burns Laketown, and then suddenly he's dead. Mm-hmm. And then the book takes on a drastic tonal change, and turns into this quasi-mythological battle of Five Armies. So that was something that they really struggled with in this movie, as to how they were going to split everything up. And eventually they said they described this scene with Smaug as the Bond sequence of this movie. So, every Bond movie has like a beginning 20-minute sequence that sets up kind of the rest of the movie that's full of action and suspense. That's how they viewed this. Do I think it works? Yeah. Do I think it would have been better in either the last movie or in its own separate movie as maybe the end of a second act story? Yes. That's just my thoughts.
And that is an interesting take, because I didn't get the background of where they were coming from the screenwriter's perspective. Philip, I see you over there scratching your beard. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah. No, I do. And it's really hard for me to just look at this with, oh, this is my first time watching it.
Right. 100%.
And be surprised by all the things I was surprised by the first time I watched it. And that's the thing. To me, there was a huge gap in my mind between the extended edition and the theatrical edition. Okay. Because I watched it in theaters, and I was like, okay, wait a second, how'd they get to that point? They're all of a sudden riding these rams over the hill, they never showed you, and they never showed the rams pulling the cart all the way up to the mountain. So, anyways, just saying, with those kind of things, I thought the extended edition, like, because it was such a drastic like difference in a lot of ways, like I thought it did it was just like it added holes or it filled
Right.
holes that were there. But like from like the beginning, yeah, I don't know, like I guess in a big sense, in a sense, like, could it have been shortened? I mean, I feel it was a short scene. The beginning was a pretty short scene. I don't think it really affected like how the rest of it went
Okay.
in a real sense in my
Mhm.
mind. I was like, consistently thinking like, all right, can they speed up something and like can they cut something short?
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
in
I just feel like
regards-
that for like another point in the movie that I was like, oh yeah.
Mhm.
Like to me, I was like, yes, let's do this. This is awesome.
Yeah. No, and I
So-
agree with that sentiment. I think 100% when you get this scene, this is, of all of the scenes in this film, this is the scene that you go, heck yeah, I have been
This is not
waiting.
the scene I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what I was thinking when I watched the scene was, heck yeah, I want to see this scene.
No,
But
no, this
I
is
think
not.
I know what scene you're talking about.
This was
Philip.
not. This is not the scene I was looking forward to.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
Host error right there. No, that's hilarious. So for this scene, and here's now I'm curious. So you'll have to fill us in when we get to that point. But I'm gonna take a stab at kind of where my thoughts are with this and why it was so important to keep it for this film and why I think that was a bad idea, but I want pushback if you guys think I'm inaccurate on this. So I think that they knew that they were building up to this too much, in that this was kind of seeded from the beginning, even when he's reading the contract that he signs at the beginning of the unexpected journey, and he talks about incineration, and they make a little joke about that, right? From the beginning, they're insinuating that the dragon is going to be a big part of this film. And so I think if they were to take this scene and put it in the Desolation of Smaug, you as the audience, if you aren't familiar with the book, would sit there and go, well, what is the next movie going to be about? Because they already solved all of the problems. And this kind of alludes to what Jared just said, where he goes, the book itself kind of takes a big pivot after that point, because it's very focused on that. And then once that happens, it goes, okay, well, what's going to happen next? And this whole other thing falls out from that. And from the narrative perspective, there's an idea of, okay, well, is this a denouement? Are they kind of wrapping things up? Or is this its own narrative in its own right that needs to be respected and dealt with? And if you build up Smaug as the big thing, it kind of feels like a denouement unless he's in the film. So I think that's part of the reason why he is the opener for this movie, so that the audience have a reason to come back and watch the Battle of the Five Armies. But from a narrative perspective, you have it start right off the bat with this huge threat that they then have to overcome. And that means that the baseline of what they can conquer is way up here. They are able to defeat the biggest, baddest bad guy that they know coming out of the Lonely Mountain. And so anything else that they face from this film has to make it worse, or at least be as bad as that threat. And that's, I think, where they struggle with this film, is because then you have to wonder, is Azog, is Sauron, is all of these other things that they bring in a further development from Smaug, or are they actually lesser enemies than Smaug? And I think that that's a question you have to ask yourself as you watch the rest of the film. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
That's good. Yeah. So, no, I think that is a very good point in thinking about this. And I guess, like, for me, watching this movie, and like there was a certain scene that came up that I was like, wow, actually, like thinking about this, I'm like, wow, this is a really cool scene. So so like if I like think about it in that way, I'm like, there actually were some pretty cool things that I liked about the other parts of the movie, that maybe Smaug being a big threat,
Mm-hmm.
and comparing him to all these other threats. Like, I get that. It kind of maybe it does dive a bit there. But to me, it didn't leave me all the way up here and then I fell down like,
Mm-hmm.
all the way down here as the movie is going. I'm like, oh no, like, now, like, what else am I expecting?
Right.
You know? So
Yeah. And maybe that's also something to do with momentum, too. Like, the momentum at that point has to really shift. And this keeps going back to what Jared said, which is, I think, a great point, right? You have this core element that then shifts to a different element. And that element being now who controls the treasure in the mountain.
Yeah, I know this is something that's people have said and beat around the bush for ages. I just think that the 3-movie structure was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that you can divide The Hobbit up into 3 parts.
Mm-hmm.
My personal opinion, just because I've thought about this a lot, I think that the first movie should have ended when they got to Erebor, and you can have, like, a shot of, like, the dragon opening its eye or anything, so you have a whole movie of building up towards Smaug,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second movie, you have Bilbo meeting the dragon escaping and going to Laketown, and then the Battle of the Five Armies, and you keep
Mm-hmm.
that kind of narrative pivot intact and everything, but you're not, like, suddenly pumping the brakes as soon as the dragon starts to move towards Laketown, and then jumping back in, and then suddenly doing a tonal shift and a plot pivot.
Right.
So that's, I don't like the 3-movie structure. I just think that's a fundamental flaw that this movie has. This movie, unfortunately, bears the brunt of that 3-movie structure.
Right. And that I would 100% agree with that, because in previous films you have a lot of build-up, and there is a lot, and I mean a lot of time spent fighting, in this film. And that is probably because of what you just said. So, in light of that, I think I'm going to pivot now, unless you guys want to keep talking about Smaug, to talking about the other big scene in the 3 battle sequences we have in this film, to the completely different plotline that's going on the side, which was the add-on to the Hobbit films, and that is the battle with Sauron. Dul Guldur was actually not just some random necromancer, it's actually the bad guy of the Lord of the Rings come early on to try to reclaim his dynasty, right? What was your guys' thoughts on that film? And let's start off with Philip on this one.
Yeah. So I think I can definitely see that it could be its own thing apart from the Hobbit movies. I mean, if you're doing like some sort of another movie even on like how Galadriel and all them, because I'm pretty sure it was Galadriel, like, and even some like forces of elves and whatnot who attacked Dol Guldur when Sauron was there. So there's a little bit more of a battle there, I think. And Jared, you correct me on that. But
that's not until Return of the King.
Okay, there we go.
Sorry.
All right, thank you.
Sorry,
I got mixed up. No, it's all cool. It's all cool. I don't know it all. So still, like, this still, I kind of stand my point though. Still, like, they do. I'm not entirely sure how it happens in the lore entirely, but like them coming and getting rid of like Sauron there is legit at that time. And I think like for me, like, it was cool for me to see the scene of Gandalf, Galadriel, and Elrond all there at the same time, because all 3 of them have rings, which is really interesting.
Oh, that's an interesting
And
point.
what's interesting too is that like all 3 of them like should have easily have been able to overcome Sauron. I think, and if maybe. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyways, still,
It's
I
just
thought
seeing
I'm like, hey,
Jared on the sidelines, like,
No, it's right. Okay, it is maybe like tricky, but like Sauron doesn't have his ring, so like,
right, sure,
there's that.
Sure.
But anyways, but still, to have them, of course, like maybe somebody who didn't know like that all 3 of them had a ring wouldn't realize that all 3 of the elven rings were there. But like that for me was cool when I realized that. I guess because this is like it's been a while since I've watched it, so like now watching, I think that was a neat part.
Yeah. Was this
and I mean,
the scene that you were thinking of, or is okay?
No,
This was my scene. This is the scene that I was looking forward to.
Yeah.
So like them attacking the 9 and all, like I thought that was great. You know, they can't kill them actually,
right?
Which they kind of show that, hey, it's like pointless, but for the 9 to be attacking, so they guess get away, but like really they can't die. Yeah, I don't know. So I kind of look forward to that scene and all. I mean, did they need it? No. I mean, that could have been, didn't need that scene. You didn't need Dul Guldur in the whole thing. If Dul Guldur wasn't in there, then yeah, that's like a better chance of like getting everything in 2 movies. So
right, 100%. Jared, what are your thoughts?
So, actually, I kind of disagree with that a bit. Just because like with Dul Guldur, I think that like the importance of having it in these movies is because you run into the problem that The Hobbit faced when it came out, like the original book. Everyone was like, "Where's Gandalf?" So I think that like you have to show where Gandalf is if you're doing a movie adaptation, just because Gandalf is so beloved. I mean, obviously Gandalf wasn't as big of like a cultural thing, nor did Tolkien have any idea that he'd become such a monolith in fantasy literature.
Right.
But like just getting to see, like I was, as soon as the Desolation of Smaug ended, this was the scene that I was looking forward to.
Yeah.
I was so pumped for this, just to like see the clash of these very ancient, powerful figures, and I absolutely loved how it was done to a degree. I think they missed out on opportunities of tying it better to The Hobbit, because I think I might have talked about this last time on the podcast. There is a deleted scene that never even made it into the extended edition, showing that Gandalf looked into a palantir in Dol Guldur and saw that Smaug and Sauron were going to align. And it was going to show Smaug unleashing devastation on Gondor and things like that. And that was actually something that Tolkien specifically said was kind of the aim of Sauron during this time. He saw Erebor as strategic, and he specifically saw Smaug as strategic. So I think that actually, like, I was surprised that those lines weren't connected even more. Because it does I'll admit, it does kind of seem almost a bit weirdly disconnected from the larger narrative.
Right.
But so yeah, I was really happy with this scene for the most part. Wasn't totally thrilled with how Galadriel was portrayed, but like I still overall really liked just getting to see this kind of clash, because it's like right out of the book, like the White Council went to Dol Guldur, drove Sauron out, and that had ramifications for years afterwards. So I was just really happy with this.
Yeah. And in regards to especially a connection to the Lord of the Rings, this is probably one of the stronger points of connection for the entire trilogy, just because you're seeing like a pre-manifestation of Sauron before he comes in his full force in the Lord of the Rings. Definitely agree with that. I think you said this was one of your favorite scenes that you were looking forward to, and that was definitely the case for me as well. This is one of those, and going back to like how I flip-flop on certain points of this film, this is the scene that for me really set me on a, wow, that was just such a cool move from a narrative standpoint and from a symbolic standpoint, and that was the framing of the eye. And this is such a small point, but I just want to emphasize this. I think we touched on it briefly on the last one, but just like they fully manifest it in this one, where the eye of Sauron, you know, whatever you think of that, you see Sauron physically step out from the middle of the eye and reframes the entire symbol of the eye as he is the void and the blackness in the center of this flame. It was so good, and for me watching in the theaters, being like, "Wow, that's crazy!" You know, like that was very cool, and the whole scene was cool. Going back to what Philip said about the ring wraiths, manifesting themselves, climbing back up, continually fighting. Yeah, I mean, my only big gripe with this, which is such a weird frame, is that like they build up the ring race right in the last film where they have the empty chambers where they used to inhabit, and then you come to this place where they are this dark force present with Sauron, and you have them facing these people who are also incredibly powerful, and it's kind of a, I'm not going to say one side necessarily wins per se, as much as he's just like thrown off into the distance, and you're kind of left with this idea that this shall be revisited in The Lord of the Rings. Not exactly a stalemate, but kind of a stalemate. And these are very powerful characters. I guess I don't see any level of sacrifice or understanding of how powerful they are, is maybe my only thing. And this isn't a big deal. It's just like a small thing from me being such a huge fan of all the other. Well, I guess I'm not a huge fan because you guys are here, so I'm a minor fan. But you know, like it's like this stuff is the stuff they build up to in the other films to a huge degree, and I, as an audience, know the ring race are terrifying in the Fellowship of the Ring. So to see them in full evil fight and kind of get their butts whooped by these other characters, it's like, okay, well, these guys are super powerful, but you don't know if they really are powerful. Does that make sense, like where I'm coming from with that? What are your thoughts, Philip?
Man, yeah, I get it. It's like how they manifest them. Okay, well, like for one, like the whole like unseen world is like part of like where it's where the ring wraiths dwell. So
True.
if you're a regular person, basically, you're not gonna see the ring wraiths.
Mhm.
I don't even know like who all is able to see them without somehow accessing the unseen world themselves.
Mhm.
But anyway, so that was interesting that you could actually see like their figure. Maybe everyone there in the White Council can like see into the unseen world fine, which is probably the case. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, of course, like if you're talking, I don't know, like Jerry could probably talk more about like the level of like power between the White Council and the Nine.
Sure.
But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so like, as much as I love this scene, it also is. It's very. It would be an impossible scene to write for. I'm thinking of like as a screenwriter, like from a screenwriter's perspective, trying to write for this scene would be a nightmare because you're portraying the unportrayable. Like you have wraiths that are half foot in this world, most of them aren't. You have Sauron, who is nameless void, and then you have angelic beings, aka the wizards, wrapped in mortal flesh with immortal elves who are like beginning to fade. And you have the power of the three rings versus Sauron, who doesn't have a ring yet, but who has the full strength of the nine with him. And, like, that's, I don't even know how you'd begin to like try to portray some sort of battle like that.
Right.
And that's actually why Tolkien, a lot of the times, I don't think he even really bothers. And like Lord of the Rings, like there are so many times in like Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion where he was like, this battle was insane, and then he kind of leaves it at that. like in the Silmarillion, he'll be like, this battle broke the continent. And it leaves you, as like the reader, you get to fill in the gaps with your imagination. But like trying to portray something like that on screen would be very, very difficult. So I think that this scene did a pretty decent job trying to do something impossible.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take, and I do recall that even vaguely reading on some of the, like when Morgoth gets the beatdown in Silmarillion, I vaguely recall something like that happening where it's like, this was crazy, moving on, and you're like, okay, what?
In literally one sentence of the Silmarillion, it says, and then Morgoth unleashed all the winged dragons he had. And then that's like the last time it's ever mentioned. And you're like, wait, what? Wait.
Hold on. That's hilarious. Nice. Yeah, there was a lot of fighting in this in this film. It in some ways, even in our discussion, drew us back from the protagonists of this film, which is, Bilbo and Thorin, who actually aren't part of those two fights at all. What are you guys' thoughts on? Well, let's start with Bilbo, and then we'll go into Thorin. And Jared, if you want to start with that, feel free.
Yeah, this is like, oh, it just bothers me so much. I forgot that Bilbo was a character. The first time I watched this movie, I forgot that he was a character until like a third of the way in.
Right.
I was like, oh, hey, Bilbo, what's
Yeah.
up? And like, I understand because it's kind of rough because you want to delve into Thorin's psyche because he has, I would argue, by far the most emotional stakes in the story. So you want to delve into what he's thinking, why he suddenly becomes really obsessed with the gold. You want to delve really a lot into that. But then at the same time, you're like, well, the first two movies, we've set up Bilbo as the main character.
Yeah.
How are we going to keep him as the main character?
Yeah.
So I think this movie just really struggles with it a lot. And to be fair, Tolkien also struggled with that too. Because Bilbo in the books gets knocked out by a rock and misses the entire Battle of the Five Armies. I mean, that still kind of happens in this one. But yeah, no, it's very rough because Tolkien literally just had to get Bilbo out of the way. And so this movie, unfortunately, has to put Bilbo back in the way and put him back in the frame and try to find ways to do that. So it's kind of this weird tug of war between the two. And I think they do it like, I mean, Martin Freeman and Richard Armitage as Bilbo and Thorin give it this movie their all.
Yeah.
They're such good actors. That's why I gave the movie like a higher than I wanted it to, because the acting is so good. But like, yeah, it just leads to this weird tug of war between them.
And I think that's fair. Philip, what were your thoughts before we go too off the beaten path?
Yeah, like there were some things that were like could be cut out that weren't needed for like Bilbo to be in there, for sure. Yeah, I don't know, like you're saying, it's kind of difficult to just kind of think about who would be the main character, and they're trying to portray. But I would almost say Thorin, honestly. If I was just to say which one it would be, I would say Thorin for sure. Because like in all the kind of the higher stakes, with him, are always like kind of involving him. So
Yeah.
And with the gold, like he's the one not giving up the gold, and that involves like everybody. So
Yeah. Well, and in this film, you get a lot of discussion, especially between Bilbo and Thorin, but even especially around Thorin, about this idea of loyalty and what does loyalty look like? What does loyalty mean? And his idea of, well, loyalty with the other dwarves, they aren't being loyal to me because someone is keeping the Arkenstone from me, right? Or the gold in the in Erebor belonging to him, and so these people of Dale have put him, or sorry, not Dale, of Laketown have put him in an unfair burden where they said, you owe us this, and he had no choice but to grant them this when he really should not have, as the rightful king under the mountain, right? So there's all of these ideas of like, what does loyalty mean? What does loyalty look like? And without Thorin, you don't have that discussion. But at the same time, the first film and the end of this film start and end with Bilbo. So it's like, okay, so what, like, who is the main character? And you get the idea that, well, can it be both? Maybe. I think there are interesting sides for both sides, if you will, but that goes back to what Jared said, where Bilbo gets knocked out. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a long time since I've read the books, but does Bilbo get knocked out in the books and then it kind of skips over most of the battle, or is the battle actually narrated post without his knowledge?
It's basically he gets knocked out, he's woken up, and the narrator of the book itself like says there was a great battle of Five Armies.
Okay.
And then once Bilbo is woken up, he goes to see Thorin, who's on his deathbed, which I have many thoughts about Thorin and feeling Achilles' death. I will not say now, but I have many thoughts about this.
Nice. Yeah, because that was my general impression when I watched this. Is because of all of the battles in this film, that is the most long and drawn out battle I've seen in a lot of films, let alone in this film, which it especially is long and drawn out. So, having looked at the books and going, oh, this is like kind of a minor, not maybe it's not like a minor part of the books, I guess, correcting myself, but it is not well established and developed in the books in the same way it is in the films. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that it wasn't the primary focus of the films, this battle, while it is interesting and I don't know. I go back and forth on how I feel about it. I'll just say about that. I don't know how you guys want to introduce that, but Philip, I'm curious what your thoughts were on this part of the film, especially as they bring in that conflict. And let me just take a step back before you get into the actual battling part, because it starts with Bilbo giving the Arkenstone to Bard and Thranduil, and them saying, "We have this. Give us what we want, and we'll give you what you want." And this whole almost, I'm going to kill my own friend because he gave them what rightfully belongs to me. They have that. What are your thoughts on that? And then them leading into the Battle of the Five Armies.
It's his pride that's getting him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the primary thing. And I don't. Again, like, it's been a while since I've read the book, so like Jared could correct me on this. I don't know if like the whole dragon sickness thing is a part of the book, because I feel like the whole like dwarven greed thing is kicking in like more than anything else. So yeah, so it is interesting. Like when you have who is it? Was it Bilbo, or is it like the older guy with the older dwarf white hair who told Thorin like, hey, Thorin, who started this journey, like would never have like turned on his friends or his kin or whatever. So I thought that was a pretty interesting, like, kind of. Anyways, I thought that was a cool moment there. I don't remember if that's when he started like thinking about whether or not he should go out and fight, but yeah.
Jared, go ahead. Feel free to.
So the dragon sickness is something that's expanded on. I think there's like the roots of it are there in the book, like this inflamed, like unnatural love for gold. Because it does mention that like gold that has sat under a dragon for too long kind of becomes like almost infected. It's just kind of like a very soft magic kind of thing. So the idea of like dragon sickness is definitely heightened a lot in this movie, but I understand like where they're coming from with it. I personally like really love the whole stuff with like Thorin delivering the Arkenstone, because that goes pretty well with the book, and I also just think it's done really well. I have lots of issues with how Thranduil is portrayed in this movie. He's a jerk in this movie, and it makes me really mad. There's
little check right here. Were you the one that was saying on the last podcast that you loved how Thranduil was portrayed in Desolation of Smaug?
I said, no. So I was saying that I liked how he was. I like how Lee Pace portrays him. I think that he's okay in Desolation of Smaug. I think that this movie is where he falls apart in terms of his characterization.
All right. Keep going.
Yeah. So, so again, lovely Pace. So much as Thranduil.
Yeah.
But he's written like crap in this movie, and it makes me mad. Because like there's a scene in this movie where Thranduil gives all the survivors of Laketown food. And then Bard's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for doing this. And Thranduil's like, I wasn't doing this to be nice. I want something from you. That infuriates me, because there is a legit sentence in the Hobbit book that says, now King Thranduil, or the King of the Woodland Realms, was not an unkind man. And like he gave all this stuff to the people of Laketown out of the goodness of his heart because he cares. And it's just like, you are just blatantly switching his characterization around to add more drama to him hating the dwarves. And I didn't like that, because I'm all for like upping the stakes, but not at the expense of character. And that's kind of like where I also really started to get annoyed, even as like a 15-year-old watching this in the theater, because I like just read the book before seeing this movie, and I was like, what? So yeah, and then like leading into the battle itself, I think that there was like some really interesting kind of dynamics going on, but then it became so long. Like they tried to do what they would do in like the Battle of Minas Tirith, which, you know, the Battle of Minas Tirith, you had things going on inside the city, and then you had things going on Pelennor Field. Right. So in this movie, they try to do the same thing. They try to have things going on in the city of Dale. They have to try things going on in front of the fields of Erebor, and then eventually on the top of the Tower of Ravenhill, which is where Thorin and all that kind of stuff with Azog comes into play. And they have tried to have multiple theaters. And then all of those theaters are dragging. And so when you cut back between 3 separate storylines that are dragging continuously, it's like, oh my gosh, can I be knocked out and skip to the end of this?
Oh wow, that's awesome. That is such a good sentiment. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Philip?
Yeah, so I think like something that's kind of maybe neat to try to think about is like, all right, what are all the parts here that could be knocked out that we don't need, you know? Because I know like starting off with like the elves and the dwarves, for one, like I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure the elves and the dwarves don't even clash in the Hobbit. They don't even like fight at all. So like there, it's like they almost fight. But it's like Gandalf. He comes right in the middle of them and is like, stop! They're all right there. And they're going to be attacking us now.
Right.
And it's like not this like force of like all these great like worms and like and you know, trolls. It's like they're just like goblins coming down from the hills and like attacking everybody. And that's one army. And then it's like the eagles are another army. And then like the dwarves and the elves, are they considered 2 different armies?
That's actually that's a debate that's never been settled.
So anyways, they kind of have like this idea of like all these 5 armies, and Bard is like a whole army by himself. It's like, not Beorn, not Bard. Beorn.
Beorn's
Beorn's like a whole army by himself. But but there are definitely things to be cut out, like the whole like waving of the things.
You mean like
when they're up top? Like the flags and raising and lowering them. Like it was just, that could have been cut out. Like I liked seeing the dwarves. You see, that's what I like seeing was like the dwarves and their shield wall. When their shield wall went up, I'm like, all right, guys, let's go. This is all I wanted to watch. It's like, this is great. So I think like they could have done that. Now, I remember seeing this too in the theaters, and even like still when I saw it, it was like kind of a joke when the elves dropped there. I'm like, oh, come on, dude. We're supposed to watch the orcs run into the shield wall. The elves are supposed to shoot bows behind the shield wall. And then like, you know, let's take this on, you know, and then Thorin, I don't know, like Thorin should come out faster.
Yeah.
He should come out. He should come out faster and then meet with the dwarves, and they just like start plowing through everybody, you know, and then like, I mean, I get it. They had to build up in a sense of like, all right, what's this big threat? Kind of, we're talking about like what's going to be stronger than Smaug, you know, like that's a good point. But still, I feel like that it could have been like maybe just a hard sell.
Sure.
Maybe just a hard point.
Another thing that infuriates me about how Thranduil is characterized is when all of the goblins or the orcs in this movie appear, Thranduil and his elves do nothing. And then they kind of just sit there, and then Gandalf's like, Thranduil, what are you doing? And then Thranduil like half turns away for a second.
Mhm.
And in the book, it specifically says as soon as the elves see that they're goblins, they go into like supreme battle mode.
Mhm.
They are out for blood because
Yeah.
elves and goblins are like eternal enemies. And that just bothered me so much.
Oh, but another thing too is that, like, again, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure there were just goblins. Like, goblins aren't like armed with like great swords and armor. They're just coming down the hills like pouring in droves.
Uh-huh.
So like
Yeah.
for these, you got like guys armed like the Uruk-hai and the two towers. It's like no,
Yeah.
it's like no.
So in the book, it's the goblins of the Misty Mountains. Once the Goblin King dies, news is spread throughout all the various goblin kingdoms, and I think it's possible that orcs joined in. I think goblins and orcs were kind of used interchangeably at this point when Tolkien was writing.
Okay.
So there could have been definitely orcs there. It is suggested that because Bolg is there in the Azog is dead in the book.
Mhm.
Like he's
Right.
long dead.
Right.
Bolg is there, and it is like strongly implied that Sauron kind of whipped the goblins up into a frenzy, but they were not this like separate military kind of like thing in well-charged ranks marching on the Lonely Mountain. They just suddenly came out of nowhere. And also, the wolves from the first movie were actually their own talking entities. So like the wolves had their own clans, and so some people debate if the wolves were their own army, and they don't even show up in this movie at all. So yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
What's this, really? Huh.
Yeah, the only time
Okay.
a wolf appears in this movie is when Azog is riding the White Warp.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
I guess that's right. I guess the Rams take
Yeah,
that side.
the Rams take the place.
Yeah.
Are the Rams
Which,
their own
like,
army?
like honestly, like it's like one of those things too, where that whole scene could be cut. Like they don't need to be running up that hill. Like because
With the
I remember
Rams.
watching the theater, just being like, "This is random."
Yeah. Yeah.
But the crossbow is cool. I had to admit the crossbow's cool. Like
You mean
it
the
was-
forgot about that.
spinning thing that cuts the arrows? Is that what you're talking
no, the
about?
crossbow from the wagon.
Oh,
that they're
In
using
the
to
extended
go up-
edition,
Oh,
they
yeah.
use a
Yeah.
crossbow in the back of their wagon as they're going across the ice river.
right. That has the
Yeah.
automatic reload thing in it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a machine gun.
Yeah. That was true. Yeah, I
but-
mean they had a lot of cool, like interesting elements like that. But then you look at it, and like you said, could this be cut for the sake of the scene dragging? And maybe, or maybe they could have shown a small 30-second scene with this cool element that would have done for what we needed regarding that aspect. I don't know. What I do think is overall it dragged a lot, and you have a lot of time that wasn't necessary. But we get up to the Ravenhill, I think is what you said it was called. I didn't know what it was called. But they have Azog up there, and then you have Fili and Keely and Thorin. And I think even Bilbo shows up for a bit up there before he gets knocked out. Before Azog has the big face-off with Thorin. Fili dies, Keely dies, Thorin dies, Azog dies. Everyone dies! What was your thoughts on that climactic scene for the protagonist and his friends? Or one of the protagonists and his friends. Jared, you want to start us off? You look a little peeved.
This is what knocked down the movie like 5 points instantly. So the whole Ravenhill sequence, I can't stand from start to finish.
Mhm.
Just like my primary thing is that Fili and Killy's deaths in the Hobbit book are so much better than they are in the movie.
Oh, interesting.
Like a really big thing in Old English literature is the bond between nephew and uncle. That's a very huge thing. That's why Fili and Killy are Thorin's nephews by his sister. That's why they get to go on the journey with him. And they die defending Thorin after he's cut down by Bolg. So Thorin isn't dead yet. He's like slowly bleeding out.
Mhm.
And Fili and Killy are fighting off Bolg and other goblins trying to get at Thorin and actually finish the job. And Fili and Killy both die defending their uncle side by side. In this movie, you get long, drawn out moment of Tauriel looking up at Keely, screaming no, and then Keely's killed, and then Feely's also thrown off a tower thing, and then everyone is just staring in like horror. And I was also staring in horror in the theater, but for a different reason. And because I was so mad. And yeah, so like you have that whole thing that just throws out like all of like the family bond and everything, in my opinion at least. And then you have Azog, who is supposed to be dead, fighting off against Thorin. Meanwhile, Bolg, the actual villain, is fighting Legolas, who's running up Minecraft stairs as they're falling, and then Bolg falls down a frozen waterfall and gets crushed by another piece of falling debris.
He's Legolas, he can do anything.
I kid you not, when I watched that scene in the movie, someone in the seat row in front of me said, "What?" And I was like, I don't know. And my sister literally almost walked out of the movie at that point. So, like, I was blown away by how you can take something so good from the source material and then drag it out into this convoluted plot. I don't know. It infuriated me. But that's enough for now.
Dad, you said it all. Philip, what are your thoughts on that?
Man, yeah,
He's like, I loved it. It was so good. How could you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was good. I thought like this watch around. I did think it was good. I think that there were moments when I was like, okay, like this is dragging out kind of, but like I saw too with like the crossbow. I was like, okay, like, you know, you can like it's supposed to be a little more lighthearted, you know, than Lord of the Rings, right? That's the purpose of the book. It's like it's written for like 11-year-olds or something,
right?
But anyway, so it's good that in the movie that they like specifically show how like, hey, like I don't know, it's kind of interesting actually. Because it's almost like they're having the goblins there because of Thorin, in a sense. Because Azog's trying to kill Thorin.
Okay.
I don't know why they're attacking, other than that. Okay, but it's like I know what like Jared's giving kind of the backstory of like, oh, this is a great like strategic location. I don't know that they really go into that for like the rest of the and any other part of like the other movies. So it's like kind of interesting. Okay, so like why are they there? They're there just to like take out the like the dwarves. I'm just thinking like, okay, if they shortened it and if they made it just like, okay, here come the goblins and they destroy them, and it's like, okay, yay, to what end?
Right.
It's like, yay, we just defended this because they're trying to get the gold, or is this because they're like trying to like, wait, what's the point of them being here? Oh, it's for Thorin, I guess. You know, Azog's trying to kill Thorin. I guess that's it. But they bring like, you know, like this whole army. So
yeah, there's this idea, I guess, you get with it that if Thorin and his troop kill Azog, the entire battle will end, which isn't exactly the case because really it doesn't end until the Eagles show up and solve everyone's problems. But the fight itself is a little I mean, it built up, like we said, to an excessive degree, and then we get it, and clearly Jared has some problems with it. I feel a little bit like I'm in a mixed bag between you two, where I think Feely's death was actually pretty great. Like the way he falls and everything, it builds suspense for us as the audience. We go, oh my goodness, they actually just killed one of the dwarves. Oh no, what's going to happen? And then you see the next one die, and then it builds up for, is Thorin going to die? And turns out he does. Now that whole battle, like Azog sliding under the ice and all that, was just, why did it have to be this long? You could have just have them stab each other and call it a day, right? But so I don't love well, I also don't love Tauriel relationship anyway, so that whole side quest was also, all that to say is like, all of it is drawn out, all of it is excessive, and the death scenes included. I think they started off okay, ends up poorly, and once again another example where they've spent so much time battling in this movie that you as the audience are kind of forgetting the relationship you have with these characters, where they have built up previously this whole drama between Bilbo and Thorin and their relationship and tension, and Thorin's relationship with the other dwarves in tension because he thinks they've stolen his greatest treasure. And so all of this is supposed to be like, it's actually one of the stronger parts of the movie where these relationships are in huge strain, but then you spend like 45 minutes watching rams run into orcs and elves shooting arrows and slicing orcs and dwarves putting up their shields and fighting orcs, that by the time you get to this climactic scene where you're looking at them all and going, oh no, what's going to happen, you forget that like this has stakes beyond just them dying. It has stakes with the relationships of the characters, where Bilbo is going to be heartbroken, the other dwarves are going to be heartbroken. Like, there is some degree in which Thorin hasn't had a chance to make peace with these people after having really angered and shoved them out of the way for his own ends and his own greed through the dragon sickness that he has, right? Those bonds have not been fixed yet, and there's a threat that that won't be fixed if he dies. You don't really think about that during this scene, and so there's a sense in which that's another area where it falls apart because they haven't had the time to dwell on that and have dwelt on things that aren't actually building the conflict at hand, which is important to us as the audience. So,
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because one of my other big pet peeves is when I finally watched the extended edition, one of my favorite scenes of the movie is in the extended edition, which is all of them at Thorin's funeral, where you actually see all of the dwarves grieving because like they got Thorin back right at the end, but before their bonds could be like, healed anymore, he's dead. And Bilbo, this is really like we've seen Bilbo go through a lot of stuff, like trying to get used to going on a journey and camping out in the wilderness. This is the part of the movie where you see him actually coming face to face with death. And like where he is just like losing it at the funeral over Keely, Feely, and Thorin. And it's like this moment, this gorgeous filmed moment of them, like of the audience and like all the characters getting to breathe and mourn. And it's cut. And like, but we can keep Legolas jumping up blocks. Like, that infuriates me.
Yeah.
Like, why would you keep that scene over that scene? Like, there was a very conscious choice in the editing room floor to go, we'll keep Alfred, who is, like, running away from, like, the troll and, like, stuffing, like, coins in his dress over like this the scene of like Thorin and Bilbo, and all the characters mourning and trying to like reforge Erebor. Like I don't understand like the thought process behind that, because that leads to my bigger problem with this movie, is that this movie can't decide if it wants to be a serious war film or if it wants to be like kind of like a funny kind of film. Like I think that my kind of thing that I think happened is that they saw that people loved the Legolas stunts in like the Return of the King, where he's like fighting the Oliphant single-handedly and like knocks it all down. And they're like, oh, people like that. Let's make that an entire movie. Which is kind of like what happens a bit in this movie, is you have all these crazy stunts, like Legolas jumping onto a bat and then hanging off of it and shooting arrows at orcs. And meanwhile, like, I don't know, you're just losing so much of like the serious kind of stuff that the Battle of the Five Armies is actually having at this point. And that's kind of my major problem with it overall.
Yeah. And I would say that, especially because Legolas really isn't a huge thing in The Hobbit anyways, the fact that he has an intense amount of screen time, especially in this film, is questionable to say the least. And I recall thinking the same thing about jumping up those blocks. So
Sorry, that was like that was a thing that really got me.
Oh, it got me too. Have you seen the YouTube group How It Should Have Ended?
Yes,
Because they have an excellent one on that one. If you're listening, watch that. It's well worth your time. Philip, what are your thoughts? I see you stewing over there.
Yeah, one thing they're missing is focus.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, they're missing focus.
Uh-huh.
So that's but it's like I don't know, because like there's it's hard to. Because I would agree that like the things could be like shortened, but like at the end of the day, it's like, all right, what's the common goal here? Because even at like the end of the Hobbit book, like it's like, kind of like what Jared was talking about too, is like there's no like it's kind of like what's gonna happen next, especially with like Smaug done. It's like, all right, get the gold, like what are we fighting for here, like
Right.
There's also something I wanted to talk just very briefly about with Tauriel.
Sure.
Because that kind of fits into this like scene too.
Well, yeah. What are we fighting for? We're fighting for love, obviously. There's your segue, Jared.
No, yeah. Like the thing is that I said this last time. I really enjoy Evangeline Lilly as an actress. I actually think that Tauriel is a decent character in and of herself. But the problem is that you made her entire character revolve around her love story with a dwarf. First of all, which just has like no precedent whatsoever. But also it's just like the problem is that when you just look at it from the movie standpoint in and of itself, it has no impact on anything. Because the whole thing for Tauriel in these movies is we should be out in the world, helping the world. We can't just be staying in Mirkwood. Okay, that's a fair, legitimate point that an elf might have. The problem is that when she confronts Thranduil in this movie, it's more about her love for the dwarf. And then also, the problem is that when they do talk about we can't stay here and fight, the elves are already out of Mirkwood. Like, they're here fighting in the Battle of the Five Armies.
Yeah.
Like, so her whole point, like the whole purpose for her character at that point is unfortunately moot. And that's just like something that I just found like really frustrating. And then like when the story ends with Thranduil kind of acknowledging that her love for the dwarf was real, like there's no closure for her character or anything, because there's just nothing there. I don't know.
Yeah, what even happened? Like, I was actually like, okay, I thought she died the last time I watched it. But I'm like, wait a second, she doesn't die, does she?
The last time you see her is she's holding Keely's dead body. She's not even at the funeral for him. Like, her character just vanishes.
That's interesting.
That's
interesting.
Awful.
Wow, that's horrible. If you think about it, well, where's the girl that loved this guy? Well, Leonardo, it's like different.
And like, I don't know. I find that whole thing is just like, if you really wanted to add this character into the story, fine, give them a good reason to be in it.
Right.
And there was no good reason for her to be in this movie.
It's true. Now, you think about it also in other terms of like how do you love somebody who you see? And this is one thing I thought about too, is like, how many interactions did they have? And then she's talking about how she loves him. Like,
that
if you've ever been in a relationship, like, don't get me wrong, but like, that doesn't happen like, fast.
Like, Tauriel fell harder and faster than Feely did when he was killed by Azog. I think they had 2 scenes. They had the scene. They had 3 scenes. They had the scene where he's in prison, and then she's healing him, and then they say goodbye to each other on the lakeshore. That's it. And it's one of the greatest love stories of all time. What?
Well, it's like, even then, it's like this, like, because like what I thought of. All right, you can just think about like, all right, how do you display love in a movie, right? Like, how are you going to show that between people? And then also, how are you going to think about it too in terms of like just storytelling and like, hey, Tolkien's like told love in a very different way. I think you could agree with, right? And like the fact that like you have also like like dwarves are mortal, right? They live for hundreds of years, but they still die.
I think it's like 200. I think they live for.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, so like dwarves, yeah, they're mortal, and here's an elf just going off. I mean, this is just a fan, like more of a fan thing, right? Here's an elf going off to like a mortal dwarf, which means that she has to like basically say, "I'm not going to the Undying Lands," which is like then saying that she's going to be immortal, and that's like I don't know, maybe that I don't know. I'm just going off of like Arwen and Aragorn's
Well, the thing
relationship.
is that if you want to go like deep into the nerd lore, Tauriel doesn't have that choice. She can't decide to become mortal. The only thing she can do is stay in Middle Earth and fade, and that would take thousands of years. So like there is no way that this story could ever like work out well for them. Which I mean, you could go like the tragic route for that. But also the problem is that Keeley doesn't think about Tauriel the entirety of this movie. Once Keeley and his friends get to Erebor, they're instantly drawn into the Thorin plotline. And like he barely ever mentions her until at one point in the battle he goes, "I think I hear Tauriel's voice," and then he dies.
yeah.
Oh,
That's
my.
I was gonna make a joke earlier about love on first sight, but we're gonna pass that by. I think the bigger thing is true that it's harder, especially in an action film, to portray an accurate love story, right? So yeah, is it gonna be cheesy in a lot of situations? Yeah, it is. So as much as I hate the whole Tauriel Keeley aspect of this film, I don't bash on it too hard personally, just because it's like this isn't the core focus of the film, so they're going to throw in a couple scenes showing they care for each other, and then they're going to try to show that it's a big deal that he dies. I think the bigger thing, my bigger problem with it overall is kind of what, and I think you pointed this out, one of you did, where it doesn't impact the plot at all. Where normally when you see these romance situations involved, they'll have something to do with, she gets captured, or she's actually part of the villain's team, or some other thing like that, where it actually now involves the romance plot into the stakes of the primary plot, and then it becomes very significant that he has this emotional tie to this person who is now at stakes for the primary plot. In this case, you don't have that at all. So it's more just a complete side quest that we don't care about except for the fact that he dies. So
it can get you bonus points, side quests.
Side quests. Just like jumping up those blocks was a side quest for our man, the elf. So, yeah. Any last ideas or thoughts you felt were pertinent to the film that you think should be mentioned that were not mentioned? And either of you can take this here.
I would say that I loved the ending of the film.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like him returning to the Shire and having that kind of moment of levity where everyone's auctioning off his stuff, love it. Yeah. It's so Hobbit. I love it. And then you kind of end the movie with him just standing there in his apartment, like it's all bare and stripped down and everything. And then he like suddenly like the music slowly changes and the lighting slowly changes and he draws the ring out. I loved that. That was so good.
Yeah.
So I was just really, really happy with the end of this movie. At least it ended on a high note. So
yeah, 100%. Philip, what was your thoughts?
I found it to be a fun watch.
Yeah.
And I like, yeah, I don't know. It's just,
I agree.
It's just different. Like I agree with what you guys are saying in a lot of ways, honestly. But like when I watched this movie, like this time, I was expecting every single thing. Like I knew what was coming, so that was different. But yeah, when it's like an hour left, and I'm like, okay, how is this fight scene gonna go? It's like it's definitely drawn out.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I totally agree in the sense that like I have so many problems with this movie. Does that mean that I won't put it on a random Tuesday night and watch it and like eat popcorn? No, I still will do that. It's a freaking Lord of the Rings movie directed by Peter Jackson. Like it's still It still has a place in my heart, even if
Nice.
it's shoved into the back corner.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're dealing
Yeah.
with right now. Is we got what this is. So we had the Lord of the Rings, right? We had 3 films. They were critically acclaimed. You know, they got Oscars and all that good stuff. Then you had this Hobbit trilogy, right? And this is the final installment of that. Puts the capstone on those 3 as its own. And now we have new stuff coming out, right? We have The Rings of Power. We have The Riders of Rohirrim coming out in a month or so, right? We have other films in the works. So did this film specifically have a lasting impact, or do you think that that is more of a legacy from previous films?
See, what would have been interesting is also to see this as like made before they made Return, like the Lord of the Rings movies, and like how would that have went? Would they? Because what's interesting is that then would they have felt we need to add these characters into the next movies because now we've talked about them? Because then that would have had another whole thing to say, there too. But it was probably good they made the Lord of the Rings movies first, so that this other stuff, like, of course, like, hey, maybe they would have made an amazing Hobbit movie or something. You know what I mean? Like that could have happened, but
Unfortunately, I hate to say it, I think that this film like soured in the public consciousness very quickly. I'm talking just like people who I've talked to who have watched this movie, who have like are like the most casual fans, have next to no knowledge of like the background lore or anything, might have seen Lord of the Rings when they were kids. They're like, these were not good movies. And unfortunately, I think that's because they unfortunately came out so recently that they kind of stained public consciousness and perception retroactively of the Lord of the Rings. Do I don't wish that was the case. But I think that was an unfortunate, like, unintended side effect.
Yeah.
And like whenever you see a discussion about people hating prequels in Hollywood, the Hobbit movies are almost always on the top of the list, unfortunately.
Right up there with Star Wars Episode 1. That's crazy. Yeah, if you want to see that review, check out our podcast. Yeah, I would say that's generally accurate, right? Like, I think the Hobbit doesn't get the accolades when you talk to people. It's always the Lord of the Rings, right? And even to a certain degree, you'll have, with the new stuff coming out, the question about it, at least in the discussions I have, are not related to the Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings at all. It's more about, does it stand in its own right as an interesting plot? Because it is fairly, not completely detached, but fairly detached from the previous works that have already been released, versus the Hobbit is very much related to the Lord of the Rings. So I think, does it shed a good light? Overall, no. Thankfully, the Lord of the Rings stands well enough on its own that it doesn't need to, it's not really dragged down by the Hobbit. You could watch the Lord of the Rings by itself and you're perfectly happy with what you've seen. But I'm not going to give the Hobbit a place on my mantle or anything like that in regards to the movies. So that's it. I think that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back, as we always are, next week. We'll see you all then.